Leading Britain's Conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 9:03 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. So I woke up a little bit late this morning, switched on my phone, and the first thing I see is a WhatsApp message from a friend of mine with a link to a tweet from an MP I wasn't really very familiar with, Jamie Wallace, who's a Conservative MP for Bridgend. And he had appended to this tweet a statement, and the tweet was actually timed at 3 a.m, which I thought was a little bit strange. I'm going to read out his whole statement because it provides the context for the discussion that I want to have over the next hour. And so it goes like this. Tonight, the Conservative Parliamentary Party had a photo in the chamber, and then we went for dinner together. It was nice, especially for those of us in the 29 intake of MPs who haven't done anything like that before. It was lovely to speak to colleagues away from Parliament, and I appreciated the occasion for a number of reasons. I've had a lot of support from the whip since I was elected, not for the reasons you might think, but there's a lot that goes on in MPs' lives, and the whips play an important wellbeing role. As far as I've seen, they try their best to support and help MPs who are having a tough time. Well, they've certainly earned their keep with me. I'm trans, or to be more accurate, I want to be. I've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and I've felt this way since I was a very young child. I had no intention of ever sharing this with you. I always imagined I would leave politics well before I ever said this out loud. There was a close call in April 2020 when someone blackmailed me, outed me to my father, and sent photographs to other family members. He wanted £50,000 to keep quiet. The police were so supportive, so understanding, and on this occasion the system worked. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in prison. For a while it seemed as though I would be able to get on with things and move on. Being an MP and hiding something like this was always going to be tough, but I arrogantly assumed I was up for it. Well, I'm not. A few months back in September, I hooked up, in inverted commas, with someone who I met online. And when I chose to say no, on the basis that he wouldn't wear a condom, he chose to rape me. I've not been myself since this incident, and I don't think I will ever recover. It is not something you ever forget, and it is not something you ever move on from. Since then, things have really taken a tumble. I'm not okay. When I crashed my car on the 28th of November, I fled the scene. I did so because I was terrified. I have PTSD, and I honestly have no idea what I was doing, except I was overcome by an overwhelming sense of fear. I'm sorry that it appears that I ran away, but this isn't how it happened in the moment. Tonight I was reminded of the incredible support those you work with can provide. Also, I was reminded how important it is to be yourself. I have never lived my truth, and I'm not sure how. Perhaps it starts with telling everyone. Well, it must have taken a lot of courage, and I wonder how long Jamie hesitated over pressing the button send on his laptop before he sent that one out, because I think anybody who has come out to their family, whether they're trans, whether they're gay, lesbian, bisexual, whatever, excuse me, it's never an easy thing to do. And a lot of people say, well, why should you have to come out? Well, I think if you want to live a full life, you probably do. And it would be great if we live in a society in 20, 50 years' time where people just don't blink at all. In the last hour, we heard Chris Dawes say that his 15-year-old daughter just wouldn't even think this was an issue. Well, that shows, as a society, how far we've come. But one of the questions I want to ask you in this hour is, if you are trans, how do you live your life? Do you feel that you can live your life openly, as Jamie Wallace wants to do? What are the challenges that you face in your everyday life? 0345 6060 973. Well, I have a guest who's going to be with me in the studio throughout this hour, Oliver Smith. But let's start by talking to Stephen Whittle, who is Professor of Equalities Law at Manchester Metropolitan University. Excuse me. Co-founder of the trans rights campaign group Press for Change, who's received numerous awards for his work challenging discrimination. Stephen, thank you for joining us. I think you're staying with us as well. Can you just tell us your story first before we move on to the wider issue?
Well, I was born female. At the age of 10, I realised I was always it was school sports day. I just suddenly knew I was always going to be in the wrong races. It took until I was 18 to discover that it was possible to undergo gender reassignment. I then spent several years struggling through the process, and eventually I transitioned to living permanently as Stephen when I was 20, and that's now 46 and a half years ago. It's been a very up and down road. I mean, the first 20 years were awful. Life was not easy. We were known as perverts and sex changes, and I lost so many jobs. My kids always say to me, "Have you done every job in the world?" And I say, "Well, pretty much, because I took whatever was the next one."
And that was because when your employer or people around you found out that you were trans,
yes,
that was it.
Yeah, in those days you had to hand over your birth certificate or your passport, and we couldn't change them. So the minute you did that, your employer knew, you'd postpone it for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. And but the minute you handed over the paperwork, it was known and you were out within often the day.
Do you think that still happens now to people?
I don't mind. Pardon?
Do you think that still happens now to people?
No, because the law is quite clear and most employers are very aware. But I do think there are workplace environments where it's very tough. And what we do know from the research is that 1 in 10 people who transition will be physically assaulted in their first 3 months after transition in the workplace.
And does that work both ways round, whether it's male to female or female to male?
Whichever way it is. And it's quite interesting because when we've talked to people about their childhood and young people about their childhood and what it was like to be bullied because they were different, it's often not other children. It's teachers, it's school staff, and it's that whole thing of, we don't really approve of this. It is tons better now than when I did it. But it's still not good enough.
And I was reading an article about you earlier today, and there's something that you do at the beginning of every year to the classes that you teach. And just tell us about that, because I thought that was quite revealing. When I
do my first lecture to all of my groups, at the end of it, I say, well, by the way, I need to tell you something about myself, and that is that I'm a transsexual or transgender man. And their mouths used to drop open. And sometimes I was stunned silent. It's quite amazing. In the last 5 years, people clap when I tell them. Students actually applaud because I said, well, I'm a trans man, and I'm telling you this so that you ask me the question. Don't gossip behind my back. You will find it out anyway. But you don't know the answer. I do. So talk to me.
And I think it's fascinating. You made the point in the article I read also that at your university it's got quite a high proportion of people from ethnic minority backgrounds and the Muslim faith, and you say that they react in exactly the same way, because sometimes people who are Muslims are seen as very conservative with a small c in their social attitudes. I'm generalising to make a point, but I think you understand.
Yes, I understand the point, but actually, they're not. They're just like the rest of us. I always remember a court case where somebody actually said, oh, well, a Muslim woman wouldn't like that. And the judge said, why would you think a Muslim woman is a bigot? And I thought that was such a good answer. They're British people. They see the same things on television as the rest of us. Most people, it's always people in positions of authority who think that somebody else is going to mind. That's the key. That they will say, whether it's a bank manager or a teacher or a head teacher, going, I don't mind, but I am concerned about what other people think.
I've got a text here from Chris who says, why don't you open the conversation by having trans people involved in the conversation? Well, we are. We've just heard that Stephen is trans. This is to do with them after all, but I've never heard a trans woman on this show allowed to put their point of view across. Ask trans people. Well, you're wrong, Chris, because we did an hour probably, 4 or 5 months ago, where we had 2 trans women in the studio for the whole hour taking questions from callers. But I completely understand the general point that you're making, because often these conversations are conducted without the presence of a trans voice. And my producers and I agreed this evening that if we couldn't get a trans person to come on, we wouldn't do the hour. So I think we appreciate what you're saying there. Stephen, stay with us. Oliver Smith is with me also, Senior Pathway Advisor at Gender GP, an online health and wellbeing clinic, which serves transgender people of all ages across the world and those who support them. Oliver, tell me about your background in this and how did you get into being an advisor on this website?
Yeah, so I also am a transgender man, same as Stephen. Interestingly, I have quite a similar sort of coming out story in the sense that I also realised when I was a child, but it wasn't sort of something that I endeavoured into until I was about 19. And I'm 24 now, so I've been transitioning for 4 years. And yeah, I was always sort of interested, once I was more comfortable with myself and I began my medical transition, I was always more interested in finding a job where I could help my own community. So that's how I found the role at Gender GP and haven't looked back since.
I'm going to ask quite a blunt question now, which I'm trying to think how I should word this, but is it in any way easier for a female to transition to a male than the other way round? And I ask this because, I mean, I've got the advantage of seeing both of you.
Yeah.
And if I walked past you in the street, it wouldn't occur to me that you weren't born a male. You both look very masculine. You're a bit beardy, both of you. I wonder whether it's more difficult for men who are transitioning to be women to be seen in the same way. I hope that isn't an indelicate question.
No, that's okay. I think sometimes it is. And I think a lot of that is often due to sort of misogynistic attitudes that society has on women. So, for instance, like, as a kid, I was a pretty tomboy, you know, that stereotypical tomboy child. I liked short hair. I hated dresses and things like that. And people just saw that as, oh, okay, you know, this is just a masculine child. But when you get sort of like a child that's assigned male at birth and they want to do things like, you know, wear a skirt or put makeup on, that's sort of seen as, oh, no, you can't do that. And I often think that has, you know, something to do with misogynistic ideas of society in the sense that women are sort of less of like a second-class citizen. Not that they are, but just, you know, the societal attitudes that are there. So I think in some ways it is a little bit more difficult because, yeah, of that largely, I think.
Stephen, I think you had a similar experience, didn't you, to Oliver? You felt from a very early age that you were
absolutely.
in the wrong sex.
I mean, I knew, I always say I was a deeply unhappy child, a truly, truly miserable teenager. And then I became a Stephen, and, you know, guess what? Life worked out. I knew from I was just going to add to the comment there from Oliver. I think there is an issue that trans women often face, particularly if they're older when they're transitioned, and they often are older, because they try very hard at school to be as masculine as possible, to become captain of the rugby team and move on to becoming a captain in the armed services. And then they become a captain of industry. And then finally, at the age of 50, they sort of collapse in a heap. But I can't do this any longer. And I think for many trans women, the fact is they have a different physique. And whilst hormones work very effectively, they are slower changing that physique. So I often say to trans women, there will come a point in 8 to 10 years' time where you could stand in a pub and people will go, oh, she's a striking woman. They're not quite sure what it is, but she's a striking woman. I said, but for us, all of this stuff comes really quickly. The difference is, always I say, for trans women, surgery is much less hard than it is for trans men. The fact is, for most trans men, when we have to undress, people will see something, you know, we'll see that there's physical differences, there's scars, and it's extensive. If you want to have a penis, you know, you're going to go through 5 to 7 years of surgery. It's hard. That's not what trans women do. So we sort of have quid pro quo, really. We take some hard bits, they take some hard bits, you know, and but I do recognise for some trans women that whole thing about being out in the street is often extremely difficult in the early years.
Well, there's so many things that we've talked about in the first 10 minutes that we'll come back to in a moment, and we'll also be taking your calls 0345 6060 973. If you've been through any of the experiences that my two guests have, we'd love to hear from you. And what are the challenges that trans people face living in the UK in 2022? I wonder if they're very different from even in 2012 or 1992 or 2002. They're certainly different from 1952. That is a dead cert. We'd love to hear your experiences. And the whole point of this hour, I suppose, is to try and enable us to understand a little bit more. It's so easy to misunderstand. It's so easy to condemn something that you don't know. Because if you think about it, a lot of people 20, 30, 40 years ago, they would have been having the same conversations about gay people that we're now having about trans people. And that's something to think on, I think, because I think most people now, apart from one or two exceptions, just accept gay people for who they are. So why can't we accept trans people for who they are as well? Think about that for a few minutes. 0345 6060 973. It's 90 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.
Hi.
This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
22 minutes past 9. We have Stephen Whittle and Oliver Smith with me. We're talking about trans issues. And when we did this a few months ago, we had India Willoughby and Jane Fay, two women who had transitioned from being men. And people said, oh, why didn't you have somebody who was a woman who's transitioned to a man? Well, we have two tonight. So I'm thinking that we've got the balance right now. I hope we have. The trouble is, on this sort of thing, you can never get the balance right, can you? Just before we go to the calls, I want to ask each of you, if you had Jamie Wallace in the studio now with us, what's the one piece of advice that you would give him? Oliver, let's start with you.
I would say to just be calm. And I know that's really, really hard when you've just come out. But to just be calm, and everything's going to be fine. I know it's terrifying, and I know that you're probably absolutely horrifically scared. And like you said, you wonder sort of how many times he sort of considered not pressing send over that. But honestly, just relax. It's going to be fine. It's not going to be easy, but you will be fine.
Do you think he would have taken comfort from the fact that in PMQs today you had Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer and Ian Blackford and various other MPs starting their remarks by complimenting him, saying what a brave thing that he's done? I mean, that if it was me, I think I would actually take quite a lot of comfort from that.
Yeah, I would hope so. I was called brave, a couple of times when I came out, and I did sort of take comfort in it and think, oh, actually, maybe I can do this. It's scary, but I think I can do this.
The thing is, Stephen, when you're commenting on issues like this, I quote tweeted him this morning, and I spent quite a long time deliberating over what words to use, because sometimes you think, well, you're so brave, you're so courageous, it sounds incredibly patronising, doesn't it?
It can do, and I think it's important to reassure people that you're okay with it, because, as I say, it's always the people who are not okay with it that are the problem. And I think for Jamie Wallace, what I would say is, there's no rush. You can do it at your own pace. You can decide to do it or not to do it. Some people transition, some people don't, because our life paths take different forms. You don't have to be somebody who fits into a box. There are no boxes. You need to find just a space that suits you. And, Jamie's got a family and, a spouse, presumably. And, all of these issues, have to take time. Really do take time. And it's just take your time.
I mean, here we enter another controversial area, don't we? Because there will be some people who say, well, if you don't transition, then you can't be described as the sex that you want to be known for. If you don't have the reassignment surgery, how can you then, in your case, be described as a man, or in the opposite case, as a woman?
Surgery is not the issue. I mean, many trans people, I lived without genital surgery for 26 years because it wasn't available. I wasn't any less of a man in that, those circumstances. And I certainly think my wife would have said I was not any less of a man during those 26 years. Because being a man or being a woman is something different. Surgery is almost the icing on the cake. The important thing, I do think, is that we acknowledge who people say they are. And I was very careful with Jamie Wallace because I use they and them and all the neutral pronouns, because it's up to them to choose how to be. If they say, call me she, I've always said, you tell me who to call you and I'll call you that. And it grows on you. But more to the point is, I do think that whole point, there comes a point where people live permanently in their preferred gender role. And that's the point, actually, when must be absolutely clear that at that point, we're moving forward, we've gone to this new person, and to say that their life is dependent upon a surgeon or, I've known trans women who've never been able to take hormones because to do so would kill them. Yet they've lived successfully as women. And so, that's the understanding and depth that other people don't have.
Right, let's go to some calls because they are flooding in. 0345 6060 973. Let's go to Pharah in Maidstone. Hello, Pharah.
Oh, hello, Ian. Nice to talk to you again.
Hi.
Yeah, so being trans, we've spoken before. I actually challenged Kathleen Stock over the facts.
Oh, I remember you.
Yeah, started off quite rude, obviously, but, you kind of are quite rude if you're being attacked and there are lies being told about you. But my life is completely cool. I transitioned a good number of years ago, and everyone in my life treats me with respect. I do a full-time job. I drive articulated lorries of a night time. I'm quite an active sports person as well. I do swimming and cycling and rock climbing and things like that. Everybody accepts me for who I am. I go into the changing rooms at swing bars, don't have any problems. The only problems that I ever have is when I get faced with media. And the only way that's going to change is if the media research properly and get facts. So, for instance, just an example, Sophie Cochrane from GB News made a point of saying that the Barbican Centre did not have female toilets anymore, which was an utter lie. And it was repeated by Lucy Allen MP, saying that women were being cancelled and they've got a male toilet, they've got a gender-neutral toilet, but they haven't got a female toilet. And that was all started from somebody in the media saying that women are being cancelled. And it was a complete lie. The Barbican put out a statement saying we have got female toilets. There is a small group of very vocal people that are trying to spread hatred towards us.
Do you think they're doing it deliberately, or it's just a mistake? They've heard it from somebody and they repeat it without checking it. And I mean that's rather different from accusing someone of doing it deliberately, isn't it?
It's absolutely deliberate. Kathleen Stock has written books about us, yet she couldn't even tell you if there was been an incident in the last few years. It's completely made up to make us look like we are potential predators and that women are under threat. And it's so not true.
Okay.
You know, so
well, let me just get a comment on what you said. Pharah, let me just get a comment on what you've said from our two guests here. Oliver, do you recognise that? Are there people that you think are deliberately going around telling untruths, or is it just that generally they're not very informed?
I think that is certainly true. Such is the case, particularly within the media and particularly social media. I think, social media creates obviously that anonymity where you can feel like you can say whatever you want and not have any sort of, repercussions for it. A particular example I often see sort of every year is around Christmas time when somebody puts a tweet out saying gingerbread men are now going to be called gingerbread people, and people say that whilst inclusive language is brilliant, people turn that as a way to attack trans people and say, like, oh, these people just don't want to recognise men and women. And that's not true. Like, we're not worried about, gingerbread people and things like that. We're worried about actual issues. Things like that turn the focus away from actual issues that trans people face, like healthcare, or like the fact that it's harder for us to get jobs and things like that, and support, and it just turns the focus off of that. And I think it's a lot of sort of hate driven that just creates more hate, and it's just...
I don't think you can get anything more cross-sexual than a gingerbread man, really, can you? But Stephen, do you notice this? That Pharah was saying that, look, normal people are quite tolerant, accepting. In fact, I always hate using that word, tolerant. Why should people who are different just be tolerated? They should be embraced in many ways. But do you recognise that it is predominantly a media problem, and the media, therefore, and we talked about the Times newspaper earlier on Cross Question, seems to have a trans story virtually every day?
It has a trans page every day. It literally has a page of stories. Only the other day it included, just in the corner, the one about Dawn Butler having surgery for breast cancer. And I thought, why put it on your trans drivel page? It's sort of like a theatre. I do think we have a problem. I was, for example, in the Barbican the other week and was eternally grateful for their gender-neutral toilets, because the gents were up a huge flight of stairs, or it was the lift which was jammed, and I'm disabled. And I joined the queue, which was mostly women, and they were chatting away, and they chatted away with me, and we went inside, and we all went to the loo and washed our hands afterwards, and it just thought, by God, I'm so grateful for this place being here. I'm going to admit something now. I'm not comfortable with what I call bisexual toilets. I mean, I just don't want to be in the same toilet as a woman. The difference is, and we have them, for example, in my workplace now, the difference is when you go in, you don't have those horrible cubicles with gaps down the side and gaps underneath. You have little separate rooms. And there is something very nice about going in there, and it's absolutely private. And in many of them, you'll wash your hands there. Some of them, you'll have a hand wash outside. But it's really interesting to see students who've said, the number of students who've said, after they've left the university, have come out as trans or non-binary and have said, oh, I can't tell you how grateful I was that MMU had some gender-neutral toilets. And I just think, there is that acknowledgement of we're all just going to the loo. And we all, when we went on holiday to France for years, went into what were effectively gender-neutral toilets. There was no choice. And we managed. So I think I do recognise, though, that what Pharah's saying, and I think there's a real problem with some people who are journalists enjoying whipping up the story. I have a very close friend who's a journalist. She and I have lunch together. We get on extremely well. We've been friends for years, but she'll write the story in the press that I have to tear apart the next day.
Yeah, I actually don't think it's the journalists that are necessarily the problem. I think it's the editors that are the problem. And they, all it needs is a word from the editor saying we're not doing this anymore, and it will stop. But I'm not sure that's happening on the Times at the moment. Anyway, thank you for your calls so far. Pharah, thank you. We've got loads more coming in, so we'll come to those in just a moment. It's 9:34. The news headlines are with Lottie Morley.
The Health Secretary says no date has been set for recommendations to be implemented following the inquiry into the UK's biggest maternity scandal. The report found 201 babies and 9 mothers could have survived if the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust had provided better care. The Justice Secretary will ask the Parole Board to reconsider its recommendation for baby P's mother to be released from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 after her 1-year-old son Peter suffered more than 50 injuries before he died. The Pentagon says Russian troops are repositioning for future operations in Ukraine. It says less than 20% of the Russian troops near Kyiv have started to move to the north, possibly to Belarus. LBC weather, mostly clear tonight with rain and sleet for southern England and Wales, a low of -5.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 9:36. We're talking about Jamie Wallace, the MP that has come out as trans today. We're asking what are the challenges facing trans people in British society in 2022. Eva is a first-time caller in Birmingham. Hello, Eva.
Hi.
Hi, what would you like to say?
I think rather than say what makes life, what's difficult, it's easy just to say what's easy, because right now, being a trans person in the UK, everything is difficult. The whole idea of coming out is supposed to be celebrating ourselves, being free and being able to live authentically, but we can't because, for example, when I came out about 5 years ago now, I asked my doctor to be referred to a gender clinic, which is fine. My doctor was very understanding, very supportive, only to be told that the waiting lists for a first appointment at a gender clinic are measured in years. So there's a sudden anticlimax for waiting, just to have access to healthcare what everybody else has. The current NHS legislation states 18 weeks for your first appointment. I've been waiting for more than 4 years now, and there's no end.
Does that depend on which part of the country you live in, do you think?
No, gender clinics are not done or are allocated by where you live. You can literally pick any of the gender clinics. So, for example, I've chosen the Laurels in Exeter. But, yeah, it's just one of those situations where we're fed scraps and we're expected to be grateful for those scraps, whether it's healthcare, whether it's, any sort of political agenda that might even lean in our direction. And I agree with what has been said tonight, because the media is not our ally. I mean, we have Pink News, and that's probably about it. They don't give us a microphone. They don't allow our voices to be heard. You only have to
Apart
look at
from
the
here.
recent... Well, yeah, I mean, there are some shows. I mean, by and large, LBC... I do listen to LBC quite a lot, and although some presenters aren't as... I wouldn't immediately see them as an ally, which is why I've never phoned in before. But we need to hear the full story, because right now there's so much misinformation out there. Earlier today on my Instagram, I posted, somebody tweeted saying that in the UK, remove yourself from the organ donor list because wombs are being given to men. And it's a joke. It's not even factually correct. But that one tweet that went viral, people were removing themselves from the donor registry.
Well, that's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's a joke. It's not even a
Eva,
thing.
let me just put your initial point to Oliver, who's a senior pathway advisor at Gender GP. Is that something that you hear a lot, that people want to get an appointment to maybe start the transition process and they have to wait, as in Eva's case, 4 years?
Yes, I see it every day, and I experience it myself. I was one of the lucky few. I was seen in, I think it was 2 years that I ended up waiting.
That's lucky.
It's very, very lucky, and it shouldn't be that way. We should, as Eva said, the NHS quote a time of 18 weeks, and it's up to sort of about 50 weeks for most people. And it's increasing. That's the problem. People become more and more distressed because they just don't have the access to that care in a timely manner. And it's just, again, like Eva said, when you come out and your GP refers you because it has to be done by an NHS professional, and you think, great, I can go and get hormones now. And then to just be told, oh no, there's a 5-year wait, it's just absolutely crushing. And you just think, what do I do?
Okay. Eva, thank you very much. A text here from Kat who says, Iain, can you ask your guests how they get on in the dating scene? For example, are they both very open from the start? Well, we should say, Stephen, you've been married for quite a long time, haven't you? But cast your mind back.
I invited my wife to my birthday party, then cancelled it, and then invited it again because I really wanted this to. And I hadn't told her at that point. She knew nothing about me really, except I was the bloke who was doing it. So I invited the tallest trans women I knew and the shortest trans men I knew to come to my birthday party, and she sat in the middle of it, looking bemused. And then she rang me up the next day and said, "So, 2 and 2 don't make 4 any longer?" And I said, "That's right." And she said she always knew from the moment she saw me that, I was the man she was going to date. I was just going to be a notch on the bedpost at first. She didn't realise, and we've now been together 43 years. We were able to get married finally in 2005 when the Gender Recognition Act came through. And most importantly to that, we had 4 children by donor insemination, and I was able to become the children's legal father. Because if that hadn't been able to happen, we were always terrified that if something happened to Sarah and she died, the children would be homeless orphans, technically. And the
law changed in 2005 on that?
Yeah, pardon? Yeah.
The law
social
changed
services would have stepped in and removed them from their home. Because I was, the person looking after them. And so the Gender Recognition Act, people often think it's about us. And I often say it's actually rarely about us. It did nothing for me, per se. My piece of paper I've never used. But it allowed me to marry my wife. It allowed us to adopt the children. It made my mother feel happy
that, this was all going through. And, that, it's that whole reflection of our space in society at large.
That's so interesting. Now, Oliver, you are, shall we say, more of a dating age. How does the conversation go?
Well, I've been with my partner for just over 3 years now, and I suppose in this, as much as I sort of slated social media earlier for being sort of a bit of a crazy place, the world of dating apps has been kind of great. So my partner and I actually met on Tinder, and it kind of almost relieved the pressure because I actually put in my Tinder bio that I was trans. And I wanted to be clear about that from the start, because it would be really awful if, I got into a kind of relationship with someone and then a few weeks later they found out I was trans and we're really not okay with it. And that puts you in a very vulnerable position. So I wanted to just be honest and as upfront as possible. And I think, apps like that have just made it easier to do that, and you almost feel safer to do that. So that's really a privilege, and my partner is amazing, and he's never obviously had any problems, obviously, because he's
if he has, it's a bit late now.
Yeah, a little bit late now.
Right, let's go to another caller. Stephen is a new caller in Camden. Hello, Stephen.
Hello. Hiya.
Hi, what would you like to say?
I'm phoning from a father's perspective. My son was originally born a girl. Her name was Peach. It's a very feminine name. And now he's called Samuel. I've been through all the hardships and the doubts about maybe he was just a lesbian at the time when he first told me he was in the wrong body. I went through loads of different stages of torture, basically, where he felt so bad he was hurting himself, self-harming, not going to school. He doesn't feel he fits in. He can't operate in society. It's such an upsetting to be a parent and not be able to help your son in the way that he needs help, i.e. to be able to change their body, because he come out with it so soon. It was...
How old is he?
Nothing. Now he's 18, and I've gotten to grips. Everyone's gotten to grips. I see him as my son. He is a boy. He's a boy trapped in a little girl's body, and he hates his body. And it's so horrible to see the pain in his face, worry that he has when he can't do normal things because he feels people don't see him the way he wants to be seen or who he is. It's an upsetting and worrying thing that's sort of out of my control. I really feel for him. I love him so much. I just had to call in when I heard this topic. And I know there's probably loads of other people that are worrying out there about saying it.
That's the thing. That's the thing, Stephen, isn't it? In that, I imagine over the past 18 years, or however long it was since you first realised this, that you felt quite lonely, and yet there will be many people out there. I mean, Oliver, are there kind of support groups for parents who inevitably will not know what to say or do?
Yeah, and I really sympathise with Stephen, because I can, hear the emotion in your voice. It is hard, and I can only imagine from my parents' perspective how difficult it was for them. But there is support out there. I think there is a charity based in London called Gendered Intelligence, who I think run groups for parents. But I do think that there does need to be more for parents, because particularly when parents are able to support their child, like Stephen said, the emotional toll on as a parent when you want to support your child and you feel like your child is being let down by a system. It's so tough, and there is support out there, but I do think it needs to be more readily available.
And Stephen, what do you say to people who... I remember doing this vaguely related subject quite a few years ago now, and lots of people are ringing saying, well, of course, you can't allow children to decide their own gender or sexuality at a young age because they may grow out of it. And then I had a lady phone in and saying, well, look, my daughter is 4 years old. She is a boy. And she was absolutely adamant about that. And you are too, aren't you?
I wasn't adamant at first, I must admit. I did have my doubts at first. I thought maybe you just like girls. But I persisted in trying to maintain a sense of, okay, let's see how this goes. I wasn't forcing anything or being, no, you have to be like this. And eventually, I see the boy in him. He's a boy. And I know he's in the wrong body, and I see it. and I love him, and you can't. I don't think if you know it, you know, and it doesn't matter what age you realise it at.
And does he want to transition?
He does, and it's and he's not helping himself in doing it with not going to school, not being able to work, not being able to maintain a job. I'm saying to him, if you could just focus on your college, you're being helped with college, you're being helped with school, you've been helped with work. If you focus on this, is how you will be able to one day do it. Medical sciences is going forward and forward. You can get these procedures, but you have to be a person that acts, an active person in society, and he just can't do it because he's so overwhelmed with the way people judge him.
Stephen, I'm really glad that you phoned in, because it must have been maybe a little bit of a challenge to do so, but I'm really glad that you have. Thank you very much indeed. Stephen Dundee says, I'm a 50-year-old heterosexual man, and this has been the most honest and respectful interview I've ever heard on this topic. As an uncle of a trans teenager, I always thought it was difficult what to say. I now think the opposite. Say what is difficult. It's 9:48.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick.
Satisfaction with the NHS to its lowest in over 20 years as the police investigate the deaths of hundreds of babies and mothers at an NHS trust. How does a decade of failure happen?
Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
9:51 on LBC. Let's take a couple of texts before we come to your calls. Helen says, firstly, thank you for this conversation. It's super helpful. Could the panel address the topic of trans women athletes? The physical difference seems unfair. Just 30 seconds on this, both of you. Stephen Whittle and Oliver Smith, if you could, and then we'll move on to a call. Stephen, first.
Of course, any exceptional athlete is exceptional, always. Trans women are rarely likely to reach the top ranks because most of us will never reach the top ranks. And the Olympic rules are quite clear now. Their hormone levels have to be at such a point for so long that they've lost those physical advantages that come with having been born a boy. All sport at the international level is full of exceptional people with bodily differences. I'm never going to be one of them. Most of us aren't,
Oliver, there's still time.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Stephen says. There is always going to be exceptional sports people with physical differences, and I often think that in some ways it's just a little bit of jealousy, if I'm quite honest.
Right, let's go to Simone in Notting Hill. Hello, Simone.
Hi.
Hi, what would you like to say?
I really just want to express my general frustration with this constant raking over of these issues. Do you not think we just really need to move on and just accept that these differences are there and just stop raking over things over and over again, trying to, accentuating the differences amongst people and accepting that the differences are there and moving on with it and stop going over and over and over. It's the same thing really with race, essentially. I think one of the biggest things we could do with that conversation is to stop raking over it and accept that that there are differences, there are historical differences, but the only way forward is to accept those differences and to move on together to evolve as a civilization. And we just appear to get constantly stuck in this sort of quagmire of, frankly, narcissism, which gets us absolutely nowhere.
I mean, you speak as a trans woman, but surely, hours like this on the radio, I've had loads of texts and tweets from people saying, well, I never thought about it like that. Thanks for having this out, because I think I understand it a bit better than I did before. You call it raking over. I would say it's an opportunity for people to learn.
Well, it's an opportunity for people to vent. It's not really an opportunity for people to learn. The reality is that we just have to accept that these differences ultimately don't really matter, right?
Yeah, but a lot of people don't accept that, do they? That's the point of having this conversation.
Who doesn't accept that?
Well, there are loads of people out there.
I don't know anybody who doesn't accept that.
Well, you might not living in leafy, sort of liberal Notting Hill, but I'll tell you what: if you live in the middle of the countryside where you've never met a trans person before, you may not have even met a gay person before. You probably have, but you don't know it.
Frankly, I don't think most people care one way or the other.
A lot of people
really
fear what they.
Anybody particularly.
I don't agree with you.
Of the differences that we have in all stratas of our lives. And mostly reasonable people just accept those differences and move on. And actually, one of the problems is this constantly harking back to and raking over, as I said before, these differences are actually an impediment to moving forwards.
Well, I think people often fear what they don't know, and I think discussions like this maybe hopefully remove some of that fear. So thank you very much. Sophie's in Kingston. Hi, Sophie.
Oh, hello, Ian.
Hi.
Hope you're well, and I find you a very respectful and intelligent broadcaster.
Well, thank you for that.
Regarding toilets, I have a daughter with a disability, and she's always used a gender non-specific toilet, because that's what disability toilets are for her whole life. And Rachel's 31, and it's never ever been a problem. So, and I don't really see the problem. I could see a problem maybe in secondary schools when children are teenagers and little. So there are certain areas where there might be a problem. But
okay.
But with disability toilets, they're never ever gender specific.
That is very true. Sophie, I'm going to leave it there because we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to get some final comments from Stephen and Oliver. The point that Simone was making there about, well, let's just move along. I can understand it in a way, but if we just move along and don't discuss these issues, how can people ever learn the truth, Stephen?
They can't, and one of the problems is if we don't talk about this, the next generation of kids will never discover that people like us existed. I want this to be a normal conversation and a normal I want to be able to stand in a party and talk about this just like anybody else might talk about some feature of their life, and for it to be totally normal. And that is the way forward. So that when their kid comes in and says, did Stephen say he had gender reassignment? Their dad can say, yes, he did. Why do you want to know about it? And it's normal. And I remember my mum years ago saying, when are you going to stop talking about this? And I said, the day a kid never has to go through what I went through. Well, almost
Oliver?
fair.
Yeah, again, I completely agree with everything that Stephen said. I never, ever want to stop being open about my experiences because I have the privilege to be able to be open. And I want the next generation to have such a feeling that it is normal, because it is. And if another kid doesn't have to go through the fear of coming out, then that's enough for me.
And how can people contact your organisation, Gender GP, online?
Yeah, so you can visit our website, which is gendergp.com. You can find us on Twitter or Instagram, all at gendergp.
Stephen Whittle, thank you for joining us for the last hour. You too, Oliver Smith. I think a lot of people, including me, have learnt an awful lot over the last 60 minutes. So thank you very much indeed. And if you missed any of this, it'll be on our whole show podcast and on the LBC YouTube channel a bit later. Thank you very much indeed for all of your calls this evening. Coming up at 1, it's Darren Adam, but next on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick.
Ian,